Good afternoon, everybody, or early evening for those out on the East Coast. Sorry, it's running a little bit late. I had some errands to catch up on before I started this live. But welcome to Analyzing Finance with Nick live stream. In today's stream, I am going to be talking about research methods and things that I use to help me gain the knowledge that I do about navigating the markets and or making the content for this channel. The challenging thing with this is that I've read so many books or seen so many YouTube videos or podcasts or have had conversations at various conferences or meetups or life experiences that sometimes I don't know where I've got the information from sometimes, but I intuitively just know it's true. Um, but it is cited from somewhere. So I try to do citations in most of my videos that require some level of research, but I'm not perfect. But the way this video is going to be formatted is I'm first going to go through some of my sources and research methods and also make shout outs to other creators. And then when I'm done with that, I will take questions from the audience. They don't have to be questions about research methods. Uh, it could be pretty flexible. But then I'm also going to later in the live also kind of go through updates to the shelf. Like as you see behind me, I've added some new mementos from my travels on the tour. And I think that's what I'm going to do with the shelf. I am going to use it to add bits and pieces and little souvenirs that can fit on there that are relevant to where I went. Like I have a mini space needle for the meetup in Seattle. I have a Jubilee cross and some holy water with a picture of Saint Carlos Acutis. And then I have a mug of the Switzerland and the cantons, and then a wooden cow from Gruyere, Switzerland. So, I mean, and if I might do this in future travel destinations too. But now I got the shelf out of the way. Let's get started with some of the research methods. First place to start really is with mainstream news. I mean, I used to read a lot more mainstream news sources pre 2016, but given the way they handled um, the whole Trump election cycle that year, it really kind of hurt a lot of their credibility to be objective. And so as a result, I have relied less on mainstream non financial sources. And in general, I try to avoid following political news that is not financially related because if it doesn't do anything enough to move the markets, it's really just noise, to be quite honest. Like, if there's not like a stock of a company that's most affected by it or an asset class that's moving based off of it, it's usually not much to that story, or it's really not relevant in the greater scheme of things. So that's kind of your litmus test is, does this news story really matter like for the world? And the litmus test that I use really is, does it move the market at all? And most of the time the answer is no. And it might be relevant for like cultural critique and analysis, but in terms of like, will this actually affect your day-to-day life economically or just from a personal life decision or your career or public safety? You think the answer is probably no. Um, but so with that, let's go into mainstream that I still use. Probably the main legacy media source that I still read is the Wall Street Journal. I think they do a pretty good job with their news coverage. Their editorial section is center right leaning, but their news source is, as a news source, it's pretty objective. And so I kind of use them to find a lot of just good ways to look at the news from a market practitioner's perspective. In fact, the Wall Street Journal did a really good job with the whole Hermes inheritance financial advisor story. And I used an article from there as one of my main sources to do that video I did a few weeks ago about Nicholas Push. So Wall Street Journal is a very good source. Another one for more European news. Its editorial section is more center left for American standards and not very good, but the actual content in terms of its news reporting is still top notch, and that's the Financial Times. So that's kind of like for international, non-US, particularly European financial news. That's probably one of your better sources. And then if I want to get the more center left perspective on things, because um, I know that that really is kind of a hole in a lot of my other knowledge source. I read a place called Axios. They do a good job collecting a lot of like news stories, and but they do have a slant, and so you have to be aware of that when you read their stuff. But I kind of read it to get kind of the most, I don't know, for lack of a better term, fair-handed center left type slant and perspective on news stories. Whereas I mean the journal and a lot of the other sources that I read give me the more center right perspective. So I would say Axios is another one that I read. I read a lot of the squawks, like Squawk Box and all these other type of sources. They're like they just release the quick headlines, kind of like a Bloomberg terminal on X to find like market moving events. So like the two that I'm going to mention here are like News Squawk and First Squawk. I did use a Bloomberg terminal back when I worked at larger firms. I don't really read Bloomberg News as much because it just I just don't think it's worth the paywall. I thought it was decent before they kind of paywalled it, but I'd rather if I'm going to do a paid subscription, I think the journal is better. And they do have kind of the same slant that Axios has on a lot of their news stories as well. So that's my take kind of on Bloomberg. I think as my firm grows, I'll probably eventually get a Bloomberg terminal. But for now, I generally prefer reading the FT or the Wall Street Journal. Then you have a lot of sell side research from investment banks. I read that occasionally, whether it's from the big US banks or the European banks or Macquarie in Australia. I like Victor Schvetz, particularly on global macro. I think his insights are rather interesting. And so that's another source of information that I read occasionally when I find them available. I also used to read more of Zero Hedge, particularly pre 2016, but in increasing years, it has gotten a lot more political and less market focused. Like most mainstream market commentary, like CNBC or Business Insider or stuff like that, um, I generally don't read much of it anymore, but it always had an overwhelmingly bullish bias, and that's what a lot of markets information that is out there. So if you wanted the opposing side to read the bear case, I used to read Zero Hedge, but Zero Hedge has become more of a political blog first and a markets one second. So I've read them a little bit less than I used to by quite a decent margin. Do I read studies from firms or literature published by them? Yeah, occasionally. Like I usually read that more to when I'm trying to search to do research on something, or if it's a source of other research that I have found. And yeah, I have read Larry Dalio's books and published on LinkedIn. Oh yeah, thank you for the super chat from Bloomberg, but I'm probably going to need another 15,000 of those contributions for it to make sense. But good start. Thank you. And then when it comes to Dalio's, yeah, I read his stuff on LinkedIn. I did a reaction series to several of his videos in the past. You can go look in my playlist. It's called Ray Dalio's reactions, where I broke down my thoughts on him. But yeah, I generally think he is kind of a broken record. And that's generally when you do look at a lot of thought leaders, whether in finance or others. Like this is my general absorption process. Let's just use, say, like Jordan Peterson, for example. when he kind of came onto the scene in 2016 and 2017, I read a lot of his stuff. And then I basically read enough till I absorbed basically what the gist of it is. And so now I kind of have a mental LLM in my mind that like I can read any news story and I know what Jordan Peterson's take would be on it. So if I have that level of knowledge of kind of how a thought leader thinks, I don't need to read their stuff anymore or listen to their content anymore because I kind of already know how they are. It's kind of before LLMs became a thing, I kind of built mental LLMs. Like Dalio is another example. I read a lot of Dalio stuff. And then once I kind of got an idea of his ideology and how he thinks and what his perspective on things, I don't really need to read more on Dalio because I already know what he's going to say on major issues. So the people who I tend to follow the most are the people who I think are a little more intellectually flexible because I can't really predict what they're going to say. I can't build a GPT mentally in my mind based on their ideology. So that's kind of that's how I usually read thought leaders, whether in markets or politics or whatever. I absorb a lot of their stuff. I read their main work kind of in a very short period of time until I get an idea of what their gist is. Um, and then another research that I like that I occasionally subscribe to is BCA Research, which I think does a really good job for global macro research. It's institutional quality at an institutional price. I recommend it if you're managing money, but for your average person, it's not really something that you commonly would read. But for people in the business, they probably understand the value of BCA. And then I used to read a group called CLSA or CSLA. I don't remember the order of it, but they did good emerging market research. They're owned by CITIC, the Chinese securities group now. The other way I like to look at news is I look at the charts because, as I said earlier, the markets will tell me what is relevant and what is not through how they react to things. So that is kind of how you can figure out something is going on that is important. And maybe the S&P 500 is no longer like a leading indicator for things going on. It's a coincidence, even a lagging, but the individual stocks still are for the most part. And then when it comes to charting software, there's a few things I look at. Like I like finviz.com particularly. And when it comes to Finviz, they have a really good layout where they have like the chart with all the technical things you want on it, and then it has a snapshot like basically an Excel looking sheet grid that has all the key data points of that company that are usually fed in through Reuters. And then you can see other things like relevant news stories, relevant tweets, insider trades, a lot of basically anything like a quick snapshot that really basically can give you a good highlight reel of what is going on with that stock. And whenever I hear of a new ticker or see news related to a ticker, I look at Finviz. And the home page is also very good for Finviz because it will have all the major indexes. It'll have a snapshot of all the currencies and a few major commodities and futures. And it will tell you like, they'll show like all the companies that are releasing earnings in the next week. And if there's a major news, they'll have a segment of the stocks that say major news and the big movers. And they have this nice little grid of the S&P 500 that measures the squares based on the size of the company and the shade of red or green based on how big or small the move is. And I also use their screener a lot to help me find potential stocks that fit the fundamental profiles I'm looking at. And I look at their charts just about every day after the close to see like who the big movers are, which of them have broke or confirmed a new technical signals of custom ones that I follow that's going to get into it. And no, I'm not going to answer a question about a favorite one stock. I don't give specific investment advice. I run a wealth management firm for a living. And so I don't do that kind of thing on this channel. No specific trades. But yeah, I use it to help Finviz to help me with my research quite a bit. Another one that's good is Koifin and as a Bloomberg alternative. Yahoo Finance is good, particularly for non-US listed stocks. Bloomberg data is really good, especially if you have a terminal. Y charts is another Bloomberg alternative that I've used in the past. That is good data for not just like stocks, but also commodities and um, what's it called? Economic data and showing it like changes in economic data in a chart. Trading economics is a good one too to see changes in economic data sorted by country and all the major indicators. So if you're looking for economic indicators and good data on that, trading economics is really good. And then think or swim for options. Like I use a lot of the options tables on there to do research on potential derivative ideas. So, yeah, those are kind of like data points that are relatively accessible that I use to help me analyze the markets. And then usually when you see something unusual activity in the market, there's usually a news story linked to it, and it helps me do my research. There's also certain investors that I like to follow, and these kind of change over time. So and that's the disclosure I have to do with all of this stuff is that my time is very limited right now. I'm running my wealth management company. I'm building this YouTube channel, and I'm trying to be a net producer of content. So I spend more time making content than consuming it. And so as a result, I just don't really have as much time for deep dive researching every single thing on every single market. Like I had a Roman Empire complex where I tried to become an expert in literally every asset class in the world in my 20s. And I was able to do it for a while, but it's very hard to be a mile deep, like a mile wide. And I've since adapted to become more of a generalist with my approach for both the markets and just my knowledge base as a whole. And yeah, that's kind of the insight of really how I do my research. But I still feel like instead of maybe going a mile deep in every sector, maybe I'm going 6 feet deep in every like sector or asset class that I have time to pay attention to. So it's still pretty in depth, but it's just I've noticed as like my time has gotten more stretched, I've narrowed down the amount of research and not just research I do, but the amount of sources that I trust because not everything is equally valid. But in terms of interesting investors or market movers that I follow, and this changes with the time because different market cycles, different things matter. I watch the Fed live streams on the Fed what's it called meetings of the 10 times a year those happen. I also like to follow what Stan Druckenmiller has to say. I think he's one of the better macro traders out there, and he doesn't talk that much publicly, but when he does, it's worthwhile. I think Kyle Bass is a rather interesting global macro thinker. I think like recently now with his position, the Secretary of Treasury, I tend to follow what Scott Bessent has to say because he's kind of the most coherent and guy who gets the market and gets finance most within the current administration. So I pay attention closely to what he has to say. I think that Gordon Johnson is an analyst who I always thought was rather interesting. He started in the solar space and has branched quite a bit since then. And there are probably several countless others. Oh yeah, I also like Jeff Gunlock's commentary. He's a good thinker in terms of fixed income, and a lot of his perspectives kind of dovetail with some of mine on things. So, and Howard Marks is another fixed income professional investor that I follow rather closely. And more recently, a guy who I've been paying attention to more is Steve Romick from FPA, who's also a really smart, value oriented investor. So now let's gonna go. Another thing I get a lot of information is going to conferences. I'm not gonna list every single conference I've been to, but I go to a lot of I try to go to macro and economics conferences, investing conferences, or just conferences that I think are interesting. The thing that limits me is just travel and the fact that a lot of them are not in my area in Southern California. And so that is kind of another good source of information on things, just how your industry works, if it's an industry specific conference or just kind of what the consensus thoughts are, or on things in the markets or new ideas you wouldn't have seen other or heard of otherwise. Yeah. Next thing I'm going to talk about is another research forms that I use. There's 3 other research sources I forgot to mention. One is Value Line, Morningstar, and CFRA do generally a good job on the research in terms of like external research. And then there's certain blogs that I like to read. Like I like Party at the Moon Tower or Moon Tower Meta. It's a blog about options and mathematical thinking done by my former colleague, Chris Adelmisse, who I have brought on this channel before. I think Calculated Risk is a good one on real estate. I like Marginal Revolution and Abnormal Returns as blogs that are more link aggregators to things that might be more interesting elsewhere. Aswath Damodaran is also an interesting blog that in his valuation work. Wolf Street and Wolf Richter. I think his charts are really good. I don't necessarily follow his opinions on the charts so closely, but he puts together good data on certain sectors. Nick Majuli, I think, is interesting in terms of his perspectives on a lot of wealth things, even if I don't always agree with his investment philosophy. And then there's a blog I like called Flirting with Models that goes into like the academic studies about research, and another one called Disciplined Systematic Macro News. And then I read several books on Audible. I really don't have time to list every single book I've listened to on Audible in the last 5 or 6 years, or books I've read. Like I did a live stream about The Shelf Behind Me, the book part of it, a few months ago. And I might do a separate one on specific books, but I try to read at least one new interesting book a month. And half the books I read are generally finance or economics related, and half of them are not. I think it's really important to have a more general source of knowledge and information. Like if you want to be good at understanding how the world works around you in the markets, you can't just only read market content. And no, I'm not reading a script. I did list some of the sources in writing so I wouldn't forget them, but I don't really use scripts. The only time I kind of use scripts is when I do my live speeches on the road at the meetups. And speaking of the meetups, the tour is almost ending. We have 3 remaining stops for this year. One is going to be in Washington, D.C. on this Thursday. We have Boston this Saturday and San Diego on October 4th. And that is going to conclude the Analyzing Finance with Nick tour for 2025. So it's been a good run. I've been touring basically across the country in the US, and we've also stopped in Canada, Italy, the Netherlands, and Switzerland. So it's been a good time, but I need a break for the holidays. And I don't think people want to go to meetups anyway around Christmas and the New Year's anyway. But the good news is I'm going to be doing a bigger tour next year. So like if you dissed out on this one in 2025, we're going to do an even bigger one in 2026, where we're going to go to more cities, and we're also going to have possibly up to 2 meetups in each city, because there's going to be kind of split up in a different way. They're going to have one sort of meetup, kind of like the old ones at the bigger cities, where I have I rent out like a speaking room and I have a formal speech and I take Q&A. And then I'm also going to have more exclusive meetups of like 8 to 10 people, where we have a private dinner or some other localized special curated event in that city. So depending on what kind of atmosphere you want, whether you want the small group and the more premium type event, or do you want the more one where I do a more formal speech and have a much larger crowd for like networking purposes, you'll have both options in the next tour. And I sent a link for you guys to vote on where I'm going to go for next year's tour. The only confirmed spots that we have so far for next year are Beverly Hills in January, but I haven't set a specific date yet for when it's going to be. And then in February, the only one we do have a confirmed date for is going to be in the Gold Coast of Australia on February 7th. So all you Aussies watching it, come see me in Australia. So that is that's our first one. But yeah, I'm gonna have both. I'll probably have speeches, and I'm going to have more private events. Please, again, I already put a link to the form to vote, but I'll send another one too. But if you would like to put your input on here or where I'm going to go, that would be helpful, because I base where I put these events on where you want me to go, unless if I have a personal reason to be there otherwise. And then if you want to reach out to me about questions related to what I do at the wealth management firm, here's a link to my consultation form. And yeah, Toronto is planned for sometime next year, by the way. So I was going to do it originally this fall, but I just kind of ran out of time before it got cold. So we're going to do Toronto next year after the winter passes, because I'm not a fan of snow personally. So that's kind of my thoughts on the tour. So back to what I was here, the podcasts. I listened to several podcasts over the years, but most of the podcasts I listen to aren't really finance podcasts. I listen to more history podcasts. And they's always change. So what I listen to now is not the same as I listened to last year, or I listen to next year. But the main podcast I listened to this year, I still listen to Dan Carlin's history podcast on occasion, and Martyr Made. I think they're both very good. I like Philosophize This. It's a podcast that I use to learn about the Western philosophical canon, and just to kind of because it's philosophy is a topic that was not really taught very well in college. And it's something that kind of is the underpinning to a lot of ways that people think and the ideologies of the world. And I think it's a very important thing to understand. So I listen to a lot of philosophy podcasts, mainly Philosophize This. Another one that I like is History 102. I don't really like Rudyard Lynch's main channel that much anymore. It kind of got a little bit out there, but I still think History 102 is a great it's a great channel nonetheless for like actual history stuff. And then I listened to this other one called The History of Africa, because I want to learn about that. It's a relatively undercovered topic, and I've listened to history topics of the other regions of the world already. Revolutions was one I used to listen to before it became a sci-fi channel. And my friend Ben recently started an interesting podcast called Authentic Journey, where he interviews local business owners and other people doing interesting things in the Orange County community. And then I like Grant Williams' podcast. Macro Voices is interesting on occasion as well, for more macro oriented and economic oriented podcasts. And another one called Our Fake History. But generally, the podcasts I listen to are not markets related. I didn't study philosophy in school. I just kind of self-taught. I don't know who makes the History of Africa podcast. I just know it's called History of Africa. So that's but yeah, I generally don't listen to that many. The one I do kind of listen to that's more finance oriented also is the Alpha Exchange, which is more about derivatives and the risk associated with the derivatives market. But I think Alpha Exchange is a very good podcast as well. And BCA Research does a podcast that I occasionally listen to. But that's kind of in the world of podcasts. I've mainly listened to audiobooks now, so I don't focus as much on podcasts. And then with people on X, I follow a lot of people on X, a lot of financial news. But outside of like mainstream financial news stuff, some people who I find interesting is James Costahurst, who is a financial commentator. I like the All In guys on X, particularly David Sachs and all that. Them, I think they're interesting. Bill Ackman does it. I follow him. Neil Ferguson. Ben Hunt has some interesting heterodox ideas, but I generally don't agree with them. And that's also the thing I want to note. If I read somebody's content or I listen to it, that doesn't mean I agree with their ideology or their core platform. I try to get different sources from a lot of different things. So, yeah, thoughts on the All In podcast. I think it's generally good. It's just I don't have time to listen to all of those. I'm kind of time constrained. Um, so it's not, I would listen to it more if I could. It's kind of you on Rogan. I only listen to Rogan if I think the person that he's bringing on as a guest is particularly interesting. Um, and but um, if um, if it's just some random person I've never heard of, or just somebody who I don't really want to hear the other side of, I won't listen to the Rogan episode. And it's kind of the same now with All In. They need to be interviewing somebody who I kind of want to hear their ideas in a long fledged way, or they're going into a topic that I find particularly interesting. But if I had more time to listen to podcasts, I probably would listen to more of the All In podcast. That's probably the one I would get more into. And then let's see, others who I think are interesting is the Nancy Pelosi portfolio tracker. A Mohammed El-Arian is good if you wanted to see what the market consensus view is. Like he kind of is very good at going where the wind blows, for lack of a better term. And let's see, I generally listen to podcasts on their Spotify or Apple podcasts. And we have a podcast too for Analyzing Finance with Nick on Spotify. So if you search the name of this channel and you want to listen to the audio version, I recommend just searching our podcast on Analyzing Finance with Nick. I don't promote that much on here, but it does exist for the people who want it. I think Naval Ravikant is interesting. I think Jim Bianco is occasionally interesting. Jared Dillian, and Tony Greer are also, and Michael Burry are other financial related people that I follow. And then Chris Adelmassé and Marco Popich and Jeff Gundlach and Neil Howe. And then the Malmgrens, Pippa and Harold Malmgren and Michael Mauboussin, who I've mentioned his book, The Success Equation, several times. So those are some of the many examples of people I follow on X. And then when it comes to YouTube channels, this is one of the last one I'm going to talk about before I get into the Q&A section. I'm going to give a few shout outs to other YouTube channels. One is my friend Christian White, who he kind of interviews like the end of the world type macro people. So if you want like the financial doomer perspective, I recommend listening to his podcast Discourses with Christian. I'm a little bit more optimistic of the world with him, but if you want to learn more about him, I'm actually going to have him on Analyzing Finance with Nick in the next week or two when we did a joint interview together at one of my meetups in Fresno earlier this year. Other ones I would say, I think the Macro Dirt podcast is good. Caspian Report, it was good for geopolitics. James Costhurst I already mentioned. If you like the board game Diplomacy, I recommend a channel called Florida Man Diplomacy. If you like pictures of like surfing and drone footage of the ocean, there's a good channel, Wave Rider Drones, which I would recommend. And then if you want to hear about the history of Portugal under Salazar, there's this little mini YouTube podcast documentary thing called Green Tea with the D-Man. Portuguese history is actually something really hard to find English language stuff. So that's why I found that. And then Animus with Mark Darien is a good psychology channel that I like. That's a little bit under the radar. Bigger channels that I think are interesting are Ben Felix, Money and Macro, Base Camp with Simone and Malcolm Collins. They kind of do what I do, except from a social issues perspective. I kind of talk about things more from an economics perspective. And I had a debate with Malcolm on my channel for this because we kind of have a very different view on the population decline problem and what is the root cause of it. I have the more economic belief and he has a more socio-cultural belief. But if you want to like hear like more like non-consensus but well-researched analysis on social issue trends, I like their channel. Geography Now is probably one of my favorite YouTube channels. that they go into like Paul Barbado breaks down all the countries and like all the noteworthy facts that you would need to know, plus some live footage of the locations. And now he's kind of branching out to cover things beyond just like country profiles. And yes, I do watch Patrick Boyle. Patrick Boyle is my favorite financial channel other than this one. So I think he does good work, and he adds a good sense of humor that I still need to develop personally. Um, I like Thomas Sowell's works generally, but books and some of his clips on YouTube. I read a lot of his books in college, so that kind of is why I don't follow him. Dan Pena, I read Dan Pena's book. I think it was about like your first $100 million or something like that. I haven't really followed much of him since then, though. Um, let's see other YouTube channels. I think John Coogan is interesting. Aswath Damodaran, Michael McKelvey, who was originally a financial guy, but he now talks more about sports and how it intersects with mathematics and culture and things. And I occasionally watch How Money Works. Forgotten Places is an interesting channel about like cities that in parts of the country or stadiums that have been abandoned and why that's the case. I've read a few of Alex Hormozy's books, but I don't follow him that closely. He has some good insights on marketing. That's really all I have to say. Grant Cardone, I'm not really a fan of Grant Cardone personally. I think the whole 10x mindset is a useful like rule of thumb, but beyond that, I have issues with the way he kind of promotes things and his personal ideology. Um, so let's see other things. I like this channel called NAS, which I mentioned in the Pearl Drift series. It shows you videos of what the world looked like in the pre-1960s with restored color footage. I think Talon Fitness is a good channel too that goes into like tier lists for nutrition related issues. Lit Nomad has an interesting channel. Old Money Luxury, when it was still live, was a really good channel, and they still have one, Old Money Documentaries, which I think is good. I hope that Old Money Luxury can eventually come back because that was a really good channel. Peter Zehan is interesting to me. I like this one, Biographics. There's also a Modern MBA. And then for Canadian related stuff, I think JJ McCullough is interesting. And I occasionally watch Plain Bagel. But that kind of wraps up more educational. I have a lot of other YouTube channels I follow, but they're more like for entertainment purposes. So I'm not mentioning them here. But that kind of is my thoughts on source material for things that I read for my research. I also get a lot of it just through talking to other smart market professionals that I know in my personal life or networking events I go into town or things like that. And just I've accumulated years of knowledge just through research and academic reading and postgraduate exams I've had to take and a variety of other things. Yeah, so that's wraps up my takes on those. But now I'm going to get to your questions. So feel free to ask me questions about my research methods or anything else, really. Now that I've covered the open act of this live with just some lists of interesting things, now I'm going to take questions. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to all of them. So if you want your question to be prioritized, please make it in the form of a super chat. So now let me try to scroll to see and find questions that I was asked along the way, because I tried to avoid taking the questions before finishing the bulk of the live stream. All right. So what do you think of Nassim Taleb? I think his books are interesting. I think he tries to incorporate too much of like Lebanese history into his analysis where it might not be the best comparison or fit. And like, I think he gives too much credit to randomness sometimes, but I think what I've read from Fool of Randomness and the Black Swan was very insightful for my intellectual development. And a lot of people do mistake variance and random chance to actual success. But I think the Success Equation is a better book that kind of integrates that. Do you think we're at a market top? I'm not going to really comment about that here. Can the stock market keep going up while housing is down and flat? Of course it can. 1990s are an example of that. Not everything needs to move together. The fundamentals of the housing market and the stock market don't have to be serially correlated. Oftentimes they are, but it's not necessarily needed. Like, look at examples really kind of all over the world of this happening. Um, let's see. Um, do you have any notable sources of information for research like Newswire, Telegraph, press release, SEC filings? Well, I mean, you can find it just by Google searching all that stuff, like Edgar for SEC, or just searching company press releases. A lot of them are the other two sources I forgot to mention, which I should add. One is Seeking Alpha. Um, they've paid well more of it than they used to, and I used to have a premium subscription, but they are generally very good. It's especially for smaller, less covered stocks to get the opposite perspective than you have. I like reading Seeking Alpha for that, and they're good, relatively good news source too. And then the other thing now that I'm using with technology the way it is, I use a lot of AI, whether it's Perplexity, whether it's Gemini, ChatGPT, Grok. I use all of them. And what you do to make sure that the content you're getting actually is true is that you ask for source material when you're chatting with these people. Not people, sorry, when you chat with the bots. When you chat with the bots, you got to make sure that they're not getting a hallucination. So you need to ask where they're deriving it, and then they'll usually put the links to the source material so you can look up and trace it. And you got to use your gut intuition to see like if something actually makes sense or not, because most of the times there's a hallucination. You kind of intuitively know because the math doesn't math or the logic doesn't really compute. So I think that that's been a big way to help me find stuff right now. Is I've been using LMs to really speed up my research product. Um, let's see, who is your favorite billionaire? I don't really worship billionaires, so I don't know what you mean by favorite billionaire. Like, I don't think some like, I mean, I think some entrepreneurs have interesting stories and all that, but um, let's see. Next question is what is your educational background? Well, I got my bachelor's degree at UC in business economics, and I did an entrepreneurship program where I earned a technology management certificate, which kind of is these classes taught by former venture capitalists who taught me the ways of entrepreneurship and startup culture and stuff like that. Um, and then I also took several postgraduate examinations, and I am well read in a lot of things of my own post college. Like, I think I've learned a lot more things post college than I did while I was in school. But I did learn actually a lot of useful things while I was in school as well. Um, let's see. Do you ever listen to the Invest Talk podcast? No, I do not. Um, what's the minimum amount of capital you needed for your wealth management services? It's generally on a case by case basis, depending on your age, how much you're saving, where in the world are you located. So if you want to learn more about that, just contact me directly. But the answer is it depends. Like, generally, is about 500,000 USD, but we do make waivers for particularly younger clients and other certain exceptions. Um, let's see. What fields of let's see. Let's next question. Are you a Novus Ordo or a traditional Catholic? I'm definitely in the Novus Ordo camp. I have friends who are more trad. It's hard for me to spiritually connect to the mass if I don't understand clearly what they're saying. Like, I like the hybrid where like you have like the Agnus Dei and the Kyrie Eleison, and like maybe the Hosanna in the highest in Latin, because I kind of know what those are, but everything else in English. Um, I understand like the the argument of the trad, that's the original way of doing it, and it globalizes the religion a little bit more because no matter where you go, you don't have to worry about local language. Like when I went to mass in Bruges a few weeks ago, it was in Dutch, and so other than the priest saying like "welcome everybody" in English briefly, the, I couldn't understand any of it because it was in Dutch, except for the Latin parts. They did do those things I mentioned before in Latin. So yeah, I generally prefer Novus Ordo, but maybe I should do TLM when I travel abroad if they have it. Um, where in Africa have you been to? Top 3 countries you like? Well, my favorite countries in Africa or my favorite countries generally? I've only been to Morocco. That's the only country I've been to in Africa. So I'd like to see more of Africa. I'd like to eventually go to um, Kenya and Tanzania, and particularly the island of Zanzibar. I'd like to go visit Mauritius and Seychelles in the Indian Ocean, which they're technically like considered Africa, like on most political maps, even though they're quite a bit away. Um, and then I'd also like to visit South Africa, especially if the safety concerns drop. So like those, and Egypt. I'd love to see Egypt and particularly all the pyramids and stuff. So those are the places that I for sure want to go to in Africa. And if I complete all my other world travels, maybe I'll expand it. Um, let's see, creative visualizer. Is it justifiable to purchase a new Chanel Classic flat bag at the current price when I purchased the same bag for 5,800 in 2018? ROI. I'm not really an expert in women's fashion and how those collectibles appreciate. I'm actually probably going to do a video bringing on a local friend of mine who runs a collector's item business to go over the economics of it because I think it's actually a really fascinating topic. But well, the thing is that flat bag you want to buy at 11,000 a used one or a new one? Because like the value of the new one going up is just Chanel raising their prices because the market can bear that. That doesn't mean that the one you own currently is going to necessarily appreciate. And there's condition and a variety of things. It's not my niche, so I wouldn't really think of purchasing a handbag as an investment, though. That's just it's not. It's a consumption item, and that's my opinion on it. But there are people who can make money trading collectibles, but it's not my niche. But thank you for the question. Yeah. And the thing with collectibles, they tend to outperform when inflation is rising or there's a speculative boom. It's the same thing with like Pokemon cards or sports memorabilia or wine bottles or classic cars. Like, because there's a relatively fixed supply of these things and there's just more money chasing things. However, when money gets tight or there's a recession, these things go down harder because a lot of people who bought these collectibles with extra money now have to all of a sudden sell them because they're strapped for cash. So, yeah, I mean, I think collectibles are generally just more volatile than other assets, and when you and I wouldn't real and when you need to sell them, you're probably not going to be able to get what you want. So you need to sell them when everybody else is still hot on them. Tricky game. Um, let's see. You should do a video on old money fashion brands, especially the lesser known ones. I'm not really an expert on fashion. Um, I have the women in my life help me with that on my own fashion choices for a reason. But like it could be an interesting topic, but it's probably not in my niche. Um, yeah, let's see. What other things do people purchase that are considered investments generally? I just answered that question. Um, Thoughts on rent vesting for someone with under 500K net worth? What do you mean by rent vesting? Does that mean buying rental properties? Uh, yeah. Have you read Cantillion's essay on economic theory? No, I've not read a specific essay, but I understand what the Cantillon effect is. So that I think that's probably what it's about. Is Bitcoin the next tulip bubble? It's very possible. I did a video about Bitcoin several years ago on this channel where you can watch my full view on it. It hasn't really changed much. Um, You think you can learn finance from reading books without going to college? You could theoretically, but it's if you're trying to get a job in the field, it's harder to get that job um, in the in the field without a degree. So if you're trying to get a career in finance, I recommend having a degree in either accounting, finance, economics, or some sort of mathematical field. Um, who is the Robinson? Dude? Okay, maybe I do know who that is now. No, I don't look like him at all. I think that would be kind of insulting, to be quite honest. Um, let's see. Have you read Thomas Sowell? Yeah, I've read a lot of Thomas Sowell. I've read Black Rednecks, White Liberals. I've read Basic Economics. I've read um, the book. I forgot the title of it, but it's the one that the Two Visions, I think, is what it's called. I've read about 10 to 12 of his books. They're very good. Um, have you ever read the thesis, The Ontology Network in Finance and Economics? Uh, no, I have not read that thesis. Can you please explain what it is if you want me to have an opinion on it? Is collecting artistic gemstones investment? I think it used to be. I think prior to Bitcoin becoming popular, it was like the alternative to gold, buying these really exotic, like rare colored diamonds. But in the age of like lab grown diamonds and crypto and gold and digital backed gold things serving as like a more liquid transferable alternative, it's not as appealing as it used to be. Um, what are your thoughts on fintech and AI and how it's changed the space? I think AI is going to make finance jobs a lot easier to do for those who have them already, but it's going to make it harder to find entry level job because a lot of the entry level analyst work is being done through LLMs and other AI. Um, let's see. Um, what's it called? Next question. Let me try to scroll back and see what I have to miss. Um, how to bypass general financial literacy and get the inner circle of Wall Street wolf knowledge? Well, you got to work in the field. That's the answer to that question. Get a job in finance. Like, or you can read some of these more advanced books, like in my reading list, is probably a good starting point too. But you're not going to really get like the real kind of in circle type stuff unless if you either work in the industry or you socialize with people in the industry. Um, yeah, that's probably the best way to do it. Um, let's see. Why do you think boomer deaths are going to do to the cost of housing? I think it's going to lower it dramatically. Boomers and people over 55 generally own two-thirds of the housing market in the United States, and I think the ratio is similar, if not higher, in other developed economies. And the younger generation simply does not have the income or the assets to buy these back, especially with places like California changing the inheritance step-up basis for Prop 13. Um, a lot of people are going to be forced sellers once they inherit their properties, or they'll move into the property they inherit and sell the one that they're living in now. So either way, like unless you have a flood of very wealthy immigration around the world, and I don't even know if there's the raw numbers of wealthy immigration to cover the gap, I think housing prices are going to be in trouble. And with AI and robotics emerging, the politics of immigration are permanently going to be more restrictionist because you can't really justify um, bringing in a lot of cheap labor when technology is going to be disrupting a lot of that very quickly. Would you consider taking talking about wealth per capita among different religions and how they see? I'm okay. I mean, I've thought about this, but the thing is that it's probably a lot narrower than you think because it's correlated to overall economic development of countries. So I don't think it would be that interesting of a video to be quite honest with you. So, like, if you strip it out for economic levels of economic development, the correlations aren't there. I think there are certain religions that manage to have certain societies structured better from an economic and a social perspective, but that'd be more analyzing sociology with Nick. And that's probably not something I want to get into, at least for the next like 12 months. Like if I was going to start a second channel or a second topic, I think it would be like a travel channel where not really where it'd be like me literally going to places and talking about how great the sites are, like the Matterhorn or the Colosseum, but it'd be more just be like based on my world travels, like what are my opinions of specific countries and specific cities and how to integrate like the stuff I talk about economics and finance and class with my travel experiences to create kind of a, I don't know, a weird, not weird, but like an interesting alternative to conventional travel discussion. That's kind of what I've thought about. Patrick Det David, I know he started the Valuentum media company. Um, I know he built his career in insurance. I don't have much else to say on him. Um, let's see. Do you watch Lynn Alden? I mean, I've heard of her and I've seen interviews of her, other podcasts, but I don't follow her that closely. Um, thank you. Ankush, did you mean to ask a question or are you just showing support? But thank you for the support. Let's see. But yeah, top 3 favorite countries that I like. I was about to get that. My favorite countries my favorite country is obviously where I live, the United States of America. And when I travel, I'm always more grateful that I was born and grew up here because this country has every kind of geography. It has a very good level of economic development and rule of law. And this is a country where you go if you want to be an entrepreneur and do something. It's way harder anywhere else if you want to like start from like a middle class background and get and try to shoot for like the counter elite or moving up into the world. America's kind of the best place to do that. And I'm really grateful for that because if I tried to have my entrepreneurial ventures in Europe, it would be a lot harder and I might have never been able to get started. And there's like, so I'm very fortunate for America, but outside the United States, my favorite country, second favorite country is Switzerland. I have Swiss heritage, so I'm a little biased, but it's a very well run. It's probably the most well run government in the world. It's the closest thing to like American level capitalism and um, freedom that you can get in Europe. It's very federalized and it's just very clean and safe and well developed. And like the food is good there. There's a lot to do there. I love Switzerland. So that's number 2. Um, and then number 3 is kind of a tough one. There's like several countries that could kind of fit in that category. Like I like Italy from a tourist perspective. Um, I like because there's so much history. It's like the most history probably for square mile of like any place in the world. And I really like history. And I like Italian food. It's my favorite country food. Um, what's it called? Spain is also a very nice country to visit as well. I think that I liked my time in Singapore, but Singapore is a little bit small, and so there's it's not. But it's a if I had to live in Asia, that's probably where I'd go. And I liked Uruguay and Argentina and South America, and there's like parts of like every country. I like the Grand Cayman too in the Caribbean. But yeah, there's a lot of other countries in the world. I've had fun in most of the places I've visited, so I don't really have a number 3, but US and Switzerland are the top 2. All right, so now let's get to some of these super chat questions. I recently started my RIA. Do you have any quick advice? Maybe mistakes you made early on with your firm. I'm niching on retirement income. What is your distribution method? 4% rule, dynamic. Uh, yeah, the RIA, it's going to take you longer to build it than you expect. That's the main kind of quick lesson. You just have to be persistent. And you need to figure out also what about your practice is why people want to come to you versus another RIA. And it's also very important to be involved in your local community. I think that's a very useful thing as well. from a community development perspective. And then investments, you just got to make sure to balance the investment and the business development side. Because if you get too focused on one or the other performance of the other drops, unless you build a team that you have other people helping you on one side versus the other. Hopefully that's a good answer. Next question. I don't support you and I don't have a question. Well, thanks for the super chat anyway. All right. Let's see. Swiss food is not just cheese and bread and fondue. There's a lot more to it than that. And they also just make other countries' foods of very high quality as well. And you're also forgetting about like their best food export was white chocolate, which Nestle, was a Swiss company, actually invented white chocolate in 1939. So any books you'd recommend to start learning finance? Yeah, I have the whole, if you join my Substack, which I've mentioned before, you'll get an email that will give you a downloadable link to the top 100 books I have in all of these categories. So that is what I recommend doing for a reading list. I made that for this very reason, because I get constantly asked about reading lists and recommended books. And so that's why I made the Substack. And if you want to join, here's a link to the Substack. Let's see. Thoughts on Bitcoin. Again, watch my older video on Bitcoin. I already asked that earlier in the stream. Is Palantir unethical? I think it's kind of a black box, which makes it difficult to invest in. I would not necessarily say it is unethical. I'm very hesitant to avoid investing in certain companies for being unethical or not, because it's a very fine line for that. But I would say that I don't think Palantir is fine. I mean, do you think that all defense contractors are unethical? What makes Palantir particularly less ethical than other AI companies or other defense contractors? What are your thoughts on the infamous Cramer video about what he did as a hedge fund manager? It was very eye-opening. I remember watching that when I think I was in college when that came out, and I was like, yeah, it's a very different than his persona on Mad Money, to say the least. Next question. Do you wish to start a family someday? If so, when? Yeah, I would like to have a family, ideally 3 to 4 children. And yeah, I'd like to start it fairly soon. So that's my answer to your question. Any thoughts on Charlie Kirk? Yeah, I think it's tragic, and there's no place for using violence to silence free speech in the United States. It's just unacceptable. It's really simple as that. Let's see. Next question, really, that I let's see that I have here. I think I'm going to scroll up. Have you read Rich Dad Poor Dad? Yes, I have. I did a 1-minute book review on Rich Dad Poor Dad in my shorts. I don't really do that many shorts on this channel, but when I do these ones called the 1-minute book reviews, where it's a finance or economics related book. I will try to summarize the content of that book in 1 minute and whether it is worth reading or not, or what parts of it are worth reading. So I recommend that. Basically, there are some useful mindset lessons for Rich Dad Poor Dad, but the actual like practice of how to get rich in the book is outdated. That's my take on that. And so, yeah. Do you follow politics? Yes, I do follow politics. I have my personal views on politics. My view on politics on this channel is that this is not going to be a political channel. I have no intention of being the finance version of Rush Limbaugh. But um, if I have something that I do talk about that touches into politics, I'm not really afraid to say my view on it. That's kind of my take on things. Like, this isn't really a political channel, but if what I have to talk about is politically adjacent, I'm not gonna hide my thoughts on it. So yeah, I do follow it. I mainly follow it if for how it affects the financial markets at this point. Um, I try not to get too involved in some of the more like, I don't know, for lack of a better term, tabloid side of modern politics in the United States. Um, and I probably need to follow international politics more. I used to follow it a lot more closely, but I just haven't had the time to do so recently. Um, where did I grow up? I grew up in Orange County, California. It's a place to live and it's a great place to grow up. Um, yeah, let's see. Are we in end? We're not in end stage capitalism. I think a lot of this whole late stage capitalism actually was a term coined by Mussolini because he thought that his form of ideology was going to be the next progression beyond capitalism. And it's now been taken on by millennials who are complaining that like they can't get ahead. But no, I mean, I think that capitalism is always evolving, and the main thing that causes capitalism to change over time is technological impacts. Like new technologies create new challenges for capitalism. Like the main thing that has caused inequality really to get as big as it has and more visible is the internet. Like because of the internet, you guys can all be watching me now instead of me doing this talk with 5 people at a local pub. And that's just a small example, but the ability that people, particularly entrepreneurs and creatives who gain an audience to scale is what is kind of creating the inequality that people a lot, but it's driven by other factors too, like artificially low interest rates and like refusal to increase housing supply and a variety of other factors. I've talked about inequality in several of my videos. Um, and I generally have a more heterodox view. I don't think inequality is inherently bad. I have a very opposite view of Gary's economics on this, who he blames inequality really for everything. Whereas I think that inequality is not the problem as long as living standards are going up on the aggregate. Like if you're getting richer, but some guy is getting richer faster than you from a higher base, is that really an issue? The issue isn't the inequality. The issue is that you have people in the bottom 50 to 70% of the population are struggling. And I don't think that their struggles are necessarily caused by inequality. Um, so that's kind of my take on that. And the only really historically ways to destroy inequality is through violence. Like you haven't really seen a peaceful reduction of inequality like in world history unless you have economic collapse. So be careful what you wish for if you're trying to end inequality. Have you studied Marxist economics? Yes. I mean, I've taken history of economic thoughts classes when I did my semester abroad in Europe, and Marx was heavily covered in that. And I've read some of his work, and I understand a lot of Marxist narrative because the Marxist narrative is kind of low key, kind of a default in many parts of economic discussion, even if people don't acknowledge it. Like the one thing I may have absorbed from Marxist thought without realizing it is that I tend to attribute economics as the main driver for social change, which some people say is a Marxist idea. I think it's kind of has a little bit of influence on that, but I don't really ascribe to Marx's political solutions or the fact that everything has to be a class struggle. That's where I fundamentally disagree with Marx, and also the labor theory of value is just flawed. Which I could do. I talked about that in my iceberg of economics in more detail with my critique of Marx. I think I did one whole chapter in there about socialism and adjacent ideologies. So if you want to know more about that, go check on that. Do you think that the Eurozone is at risk to explode in the near future, or which way it will go? I think the Eurozone economy is going to continue to struggle, and I think the euro is going to continue to trade at fair value to a discount on a purchasing power parity basis to the US dollar. The thing is, a lot of these countries care to stay more in the euro than even if it sacrifices their economy, because the euro is a political project designed to prevent warfare on the continent. So if you look at that perspective, that kind of explains the urgency. As a tourist, I love the eurozone because it makes my life easier, but it's probably bad for a lot of different countries in Europe for very different reasons. But in general, though, I think the euro is probably here to stay, but will at what cost? Like, is the question. Like, how much are European living standards going to suffer, or how much is European economic dynamism going to struggle because of preserving it? Do you think it's smart to invest in real estate within affluent neighborhoods for the purpose of rebuilding new homes after demolishing for profit? Um, I mean, are you talking about like buying a home from somebody's house burnt down with a fire and they don't have the insurance to rebuild it? I mean, at the right price, it could be a good investment. Um, yeah, I mean, it's really any real estate investment. It really depends on what price you pay for it. I generally think, in terms, if you're trying to bet on neighborhoods, you want to invest in neighborhoods that have relatively low cost of living, but very high levels of education and income, because those are cities that people have the room to increase their spending on housing, but also um, don't have to worry about as much tenant defaults or things like that because their rents are relatively low. Um, the other thing, to if you're going to pick within neighborhoods within certain cities, you want to pick the neighborhoods that are about to become new money, the upper middle class um, neighborhoods. So that's kind of those are the places you would target, like the places that mostly like doctors, lawyers, small business owners. And then once the old money neighborhoods or the current new money neighborhoods come full, then the next round new money is going to go to those places. Um, yeah. So that's kind of yeah. I'm not a real estate expert, so take what I say with real estate with a heavy grain of salt. Um, yeah. An ontology network and financing analysis definition of the ontological foundations for economic and finance and the focus domains for money, trust, value, and risk. I'll have to read more about that before I get you a good answer. So I don't really want to just say something off the cuff. As inflation increases and the hurdle rate to retain one purchasing power does, do we actually need to seek out more risky investments to turn a profit? That only works up to a point. If inflation is mild and accelerating, that's a great strategy. But once inflation gets above a certain threshold, risky assets actually go down because interest rates go up, which increases the required rate of return, and P multiples contract because um, margins are going down, and also the required rate of return for investors gets higher just because they have to be compensated for inflation. So that only works really when inflation goes from low to moderately high. Once it breaks the moderate level, which is say about 4%, maybe 4.5%, that strategy seems to unwind rather quickly. What motivates you to make content? I originally made this content because I just had a lot of interesting ideas I wanted to get out there. And that's kind of why I started this channel. I used to write research for institutions a lot. And some of the stuff I did, including private videos for them, were kind of too esoteric and not actionable enough for my clients. So I put them onto YouTube. And then as the channel grew, I kind of got more competitive. I'm like, look, there's actually an audience. And the bigger the audience gets, the more inspired I am to make content because people are actually watching and listening to it. And I feel like I'm making an actual difference in the world. And yeah, if you're I'm a competitive person, and if I feel like I have a chance to win really at something, I put more effort into it. But it's really more to get my ideas out there as my main driver for making content. So hopefully that answers your question. But I've accelerated making more content. I used to do only once a week, and I've increased it to twice a week because, one, AI tools help me edit faster and do post-production faster. So it's time possible. But second, I just see that the audience is bigger, so therefore I'm more motivated to make more content because I know people actually want to see it. Um, let's see. Do you think globalization is a net positive or a net negative? I think it's generally a net positive. I know that's going to sound a little bit globalist, but I think it has been a net positive. I think free trade, if done in an ethical way where people are all following the rules, has been a net benefit. Especially as an American, I stand to benefit a lot from the liberal international order. I recommend watching my video I did on that. Like the fact that I can travel all over the world and not have to learn a second language is a real asset, and that's just one of many. Um, like I think that the increased collaboration between the rest of the world has also accelerated technological development and a lot of other things. There are some downsides of globalization, just the unequal distribution of how it is, and basically how we didn't really provide a runway for people to adapt who are losers to globalization. But I still think it's a net positive. What is your process for filtering the signal from the noise? I think, again, looking at market prices for news stories, if the market is not reacting to it, it's not that important from a short term and medium term perspective. From a long term perspective, you have to kind of just have an intuition on this and just kind of see, like, this is what studying history is helpful. I've studied a lot of history and I've seen certain things play out, whether it's slippery slopes for certain political, economic, social changes, or whether it's how another society or a country has reacted to this problem in the past. That if I see repeated patterns, that makes it more of a valid signal versus a noise as well. Um, yeah, that's kind of my answer to that. What is your correct choice for a master's degree if fields changing so fast? Unless if you need it as like a requirement to practice a certain specific profession, I'm generally against getting master's degrees, period. Or unless also if it's very low cost, maybe it makes sense too. Um, and yeah, thank you, Brian, for pitching shouting out the members. Like if you want to access my videos up to like 3 days before everybody else, including the more recent Prol Drift video that is coming out on Thursday, I recommend becoming a member. If you're in the bonus video tier, you get access to videos. I release maybe 1 to 2 of these a month, sometimes more, where our stuff that's a little too edgy or a little bit too off topic for the core of this channel, but I managed to record some content on it, either unintentionally or just had these ideas. And you could check that out. Like one of the videos I'm doing for the member bonuses is the history of usury and whether usury laws should be a thing or not. And then I'm doing also one about the economics of looks maxing for my bonus video content. So check that out. And thanks for the shout out on the members, Brian, on memberships. Um, let's see. What are your thoughts on the futures of universities? I think it's going to be a two-tiered system for universities. You'll have a lot of university education shift online. I think like 90% of people who go to college in the future will probably do it online. It'll probably be for like 20 to 30% of the cost of colleges now. And you'll be able to do it at prestigious institutions like Ivy Leagues or UCs, et cetera. But you'll get the same quality of education. You'll be able to have a degree, but you won't be able to go on campus other than maybe to take final exams or be part of campus culture or campus life. And then you'll have a second tier, which will be kind of what like in the old money would in the past called finishing school, where those who are more fluent and want college as a purpose and really more to socialize with peers of same socioeconomic status or to try new hobbies or learn new ideas in a more organic form, to provide the quote unquote college experience. That will be tier 2 of college, and that'll probably still go down in price just because of the enrollment cliff, which I'm actually in my speech that I'm doing live in Boston on Saturday. I'm actually going to be talking about the enrollment cliff and how it affects not just the global economy and the university system, but how it affects Boston particularly, because Boston is a city that is nicknamed the world's biggest college town for a reason, because it has over 50 universities and about 30% of the population in the city of Boston, its limits, is a student at a university. So I'm going to go more into detail on that. And yeah, I generally agree a bachelor's degree shouldn't take 4 years. I think it should be 3 years is probably the right level for that. Where do you find the extra content? You join and become a member of the channel. That's how you find the extra content. And so, yeah, I think college is going to be heavily disrupted. And speaking of the tour, we only got 3 stops left: DC on Thursday, Boston on Saturday, and San Diego on October 4th. And then we are also doing a new, bigger, and better tour, which will be a mix of like meetups where I have formal speeches along with more exclusive gatherings or more high end curated experiences for like 8 to 10 people in the cities I go to. If you want to vote on where I go next year, go to this form. And the only one we have so far confirmed for next year, we have one in Beverly Hills, but there's no date set yet. But we do have in September the Gold Coast of Australia. I do have that meetup confirmed for Saturday, February 7th. And I'm going to do a meetup in Sydney as well. Those are going to be the 2 in Australia. But I don't have confirmed date yet for Sydney. Yeah, I think I will come to Atlanta. I've seen a lot of demand for it, but yeah, if you want me to come to Atlanta, vote in the survey, because I'm going to base these a lot based on where I think people will actually come and show up. But Atlanta, since I wasn't able to make it there this year, is likely going to be on my list for next year. Probably the only place I go in the Southeast, unless if I get big enough of an audience to go golfing with me in Hilton Head Island. That'd be a good curated experience for South Carolina's golf in Hilton Head Island. But yeah, if you want to golf with me in Hilton Head Island, let's make it happen. And then what about San Francisco Bay Area? Yeah, I will do at least 2 in the San Francisco Bay Area next year. One in the city of San Francisco and one in Santa Cruz, which is about 45-minute drive south of San Jose, just like I did last year. So you'll have at least 2 stops there, potentially a third, but those are mine. If you ask me what your IQ is, I've taken the Mensa exam, and let's just say my IQ was high enough to get into the club, so it's above 140. But I don't really like to brag about my IQ because honestly, if you look at the statistics, people who are more successful actually are in the 125 to 130 range. Like after a certain place, that high IQ makes it harder for you to relate to other people at a detriment. But yeah, that's kind of my take. Let's see. Advice to young folks with AI automating white collar jobs. Well, don't chase a job just because it pays well and has stability. That's kind of the main lesson. I think that you've got that's kind of my lesson on that. Is you got to do something that is legitimately interesting to you and use your time as a career, first 3 to 5 years, to learn the ropes of your industry and find where the holes and the needs are. So if you want to be an entrepreneur, you could find a niche and a product market fit relatively quickly. And if you don't, you need to make sure you're on the right side of AI disrupting labor versus being on the wrong side of AI disrupting labor. So yeah, that's kind of my take on AI disruption. And yeah, thank you about the golf clubs in Georgia. I mean, actually, that one thing on my bucket list. I don't know any members there, so I don't think it'll ever happen. Would be to play at Augusta National, but you never know. Maybe one of you guys is a member of Augusta National, but I will. Maybe I think that's what I'll do. If like there's enough people who are golfers, I might make the curated experiences golf outings, because it's one of my favorite hobbies, and it's a great way to chat with everybody, especially if they let all 8 of us play on the same hole. I know it's usually foursomes for golf, but yeah, you're giving me good ideas, chat. Golf analyzing finance with Nick golf outings. All right. Yeah. Let's see. What's it called? Thoughts on Tom Lee and his forecast for S&P 7000. Well, Tom Lee's a perma bull, so take him with a grain of salt. He's always going to give the most optimistic projections possible. Sometimes he's right when you have a really hot bull market, but he's a one trick pony. Some people want to have an educated approach for the bull perspective, and to get that, that's Tom Lee. What are your thoughts on technical analysis? Do you use it? I use it for risk management. I do not use it for security selection. So it helps me determine sizes of stops and entry signals and exit signals. Do you play tennis? I see you have a ball there. That's actually a golf ball. It's just tennis color. And that golf ball, I have it there because it's monogrammed with my company's logo on it, Spearhead. I do play tennis, though. It's my favorite outdoor hobby. I haven't had a chance to play as much as I would like to this year because a lot of my tennis buddies who I used to play with have moved to other parts of the country. But I will be getting back into it on a regular basis. Yeah, it's a good sport. It's active, but it's not painful on your joints. And you could play it for a long time, and it's very skill based. Like the better player is going to win 95% of the time. So it's one sport that your practice and effort really correlates to additional success too. Yeah, that's something I want to do more of. Would you recommend someone pivoting to finance from engineering? What would you recommend? This is where it might make sense to get an MBA, honestly, or doing the CFA exams, or something to prove that you have interest and aptitude in finance. And I think engineering, the mindset of engineers is heavily valued in the industry. What are your thoughts on investing in nuclear energy? Oh, I am very bullish on nuclear energy long term. In fact, we did a video on this channel about nuclear energy about a year ago. My colleague here at Spearhead, Murphy McCann, did a good breakdown of the industry on nuclear power. So I would recommend watching that video if you want like a deeper dive on nuclear. It's called All About Investing in Nuclear Power, and I'm just going to share it in the chat. So yeah, that's I think that nuclear power is the actual form of clean energy that is cost effective and can work at scale. Have you ever read Narrative Economics by Professor Robert Shiller? No, I have not, but I'm familiar with Shiller because he's the Case-Shiller guy. So that's where I know him from. Best way to hold physical gold. If you want to buy physical gold, buy it from a reputable online dealer with a low spread and store it in a safe deposit box. Do you think we risk having a stagflation environment for the next 10 years? I think the worst case scenario is a mild stagflation where you have like inflation average 5% a year for a decade, or about half of what it was in the 70s, which is still pretty bad. And it's very bearish for markets if we have that. I think that's the worst case scenario. I think there are a lot of deflationary forces with technology and the transition of the boomer generation opening up a lot of housing supply. But if the government prints too much to counterweight that, then yeah, you have a risk of inflation. And with what we saw in the early 2020s, the bond vigilantes in the market is not going to cut slack. Like if the monetary policy is perceived as too easy, people are going to bid up essential goods and services, and interest rates the back end of the curve is going to rise. So yeah, that's my take on that. Let's see. Do you arrive at your social class model with elite and counter-elite sides independently, or is there a book that explores this idea further? I mean, I've probably read books about this, but I came up with that pyramid and the charts, and all the charts I did in the social class hierarchy series myself. they're based on my own intuition. So that's why you don't really find them anywhere else. And also, I'm the one who created the iceberg of finance originally and posted it onto um, Reddit and places like that. So that's also original content, by the way. Um, so yeah, to answer your question, where do you find the reading list? Join my Substack, and you'll get an email once you join the free version of the Substack that will have a downloadable link. I have never heard of walks in Wall Street, so I don't have an answer for you on that one. Um, can you help me understand why, out of every country in the EU, the finance bros are the ones most worried about France? Well, because look at France's bond market. Their interest rates are almost the same as Italy, and they're getting close to Greek yields. And they are having not a record high, but a very high spread between French and German bond yields, which is a sign that the fiscal side of France is willing to crack. And every time that Macron has tried to do something about it, like cutting pensions or raising retirement age or making actual austerity reforms, the French will just take the streets and riot and barricade things. So, like, the political will in France to actually solve the fiscal problems isn't there. And that's why a lot of people are concerned about France. Like, everybody worries about the US and their budget situation, or Japan blowing up. But I think the US is going to be one of the last developed countries to blow up, if any of them are. I can name at least 5 countries who I think are a greater risk. I already mentioned Japan, but you have France, the UK, Belgium, Italy, and Portugal are all considerably higher risk than Spain too, than the US. So I would start worrying about US fiscal collapse if one of those countries goes down. Like, I found like sovereign default down. But until then, I think the US is fine. Canada is also another one that's potentially at risk too, that I think would likely fail before the United States in terms of fiscal imbalance. Um, yeah. What's it called? If you are an unemployed CPA, would you change career? Well, do you like accounting? If the answer is yes, why don't you just try starting your own tax practice? Or like, there's a lot of people, like, there's a shortage of CPAs, especially here in California, who are independent, like, tax professionals. So that's what you can do. But if you don't like the profession, then change careers. So yeah, if you went in there just because you thought it was a stable job, then maybe you should change. But if you actually want to be an accountant, and it's a very easy profession to start your own practice, which is an upside to it. Um, yeah. Thoughts on predictive history, Professor Jiang? I've seen a few of his videos. I think some of them are interesting, but I haven't, like I mentioned earlier in this chat, I try to absorb a bunch of content to figure out a person's ideology, and I haven't done that yet with him yet. So, like, too early to say, is the honest. Do you think it's worth to move states for tax purposes, like moving to New Jersey, New Hampshire? It depends. Do you have family in a particular part of the country? Do you like where you live outside of taxes? Is a place that you think you're going to move to a better or worse place if it wasn't for taxes? Okay, I think I'm back now. All right, I think I'm back. Sorry about that. My internet randomly just farted out. So, yeah. Um, I don't know where I cut off, honestly, but I will answer the super chat question. Would you consider doing a video reaction on something like the Financial Diet YouTube channel? I've retired from mostly reaction videos. It better be something that is really good or very interesting. Like, if I'm going to do collaborations with other creators, I'd like to do it directly, maybe like in the form of a debate. But I did reaction videos early in the history of this channel because it helped it gain traction. Like, my reaction to What If Alt Hist is what got this channel from basically 0 views and 0 subs to like my first 300 subscribers. So I think What If Alt Hist, and I thank the reaction industry, for a lack of a better term, for helping me get me on my feet on YouTube. but I don't enjoy making that kind of content that much. And the other one I don't really like much either is I don't particularly like tier lists. Every time I've tried to make a tier list, I've never published them because they end up turning into very crummy videos. And it's just me rambling too much or saying too little. And they like even a very basic tier list video is going to take like 1 hour of content. It's not so though you're probably not going to see me make tier lists, and you're probably not going to see me make reaction videos much in the future. I prefer making original content. And I don't really do this channel really just to game the algorithm or to get ratings. I want to do things content I actually like. And I use the poll system on my posts mainly to help me figure out of the stuff I want to research and do anyway, what do you find to be the most interesting? Yeah. So back to the question about states like New Hampshire to New Jersey. A lot of it, like I live in a high tax state in California, and I personally wouldn't move to a state for tax reasons because one, I have a lot of social ties here that are worth more than the savings I would get from taxes. I talked about this in the video about buying the village and as apps replacing socializing and all that. And there's a real economic cost just throwing away your community. And that's not even counting the spiritual and social and personal benefits. One reason. Second, I'm very fussy about I don't like living in places that are extremely humid or extremely cold or extremely hot. And so California is the place that has my Mediterranean climate. And so I'm predisposed to staying here. And like, I don't understand why people live in certain parts of California, like the Central Valley or the mountain areas by Tahoe or the desert, because you have all the high taxes and regulations of California without the climatic benefits or the networking benefits of being in the coastal cities. So yeah, that's kind of my take on moving. Like if you're somebody who's very mobile and doesn't have family ties anywhere and doesn't have a strong local community and you don't particularly like the place you live, go ahead, move to another state for taxes. But if you are somebody like me who has strong reasons to stay where they want or they are now, I don't think it's worth the trade. Yeah. Like, let's see. Are you familiar with old money luxury cruises like Cunard and Regent Seven Seas? No, I'm not really. I don't really know enough about those, to be honest. I've only been on 2 cruises in my life, and they were both with Holland America. I enjoyed those. That's something more of like an upper middle class cruise line, but I don't know enough about those ones, to be quite honest, to say anything. Have you read How to Know a Person by David Brooks? No, but I've read his other books that were interesting about relating to people and stuff like that. So yeah, I've not read that one, but I think I've read a book. I forgot the title of it now that kind of branches on it. California or NYC for career growth. Well, it depends what industry you are in, honestly. If you want to work in tech, California historically was the place to go, but I think it's more widespread nowadays. New York, if you're working at a big bank or you're working in the arts, like New York might be a good place, but it really depends on the specific job opportunity. And what industry. Like, I think like if you're just moving for purely career growth, probably the city to go to is Dallas because there's a country, a lot of businesses moving there and a lot of corporate headquarters there if you're going the corporate path. But I think you can work in terms of places like there's a lot of cities that can work though, like for career growth. Though, like the ones I'd say, like Southern California, San Francisco Bay Area, Seattle, Dallas, Houston, if you're in the energy industry, South Florida, Charlotte, Atlanta, Chicago, and New York and Boston are probably the best cities for career growth. But like it really depends on what you're trying to do, honestly. Um, let's see. Do you feel safe where I live? Yeah, I do feel safe where I live. I live in one of the safer communities in the United States. And honestly, that's kind of my view on it. On a lot of the gun related stuff. I'm generally pro Second Amendment, but if you feel like you need one, it probably means you don't live in a safe enough of a neighborhood. That's kind of my take on it. So, but yeah, if my neighbor and where I live, they actually elect a sheriff, a DA who actually enforce crime. And so I don't have to deal with a lot of the problems that other parts of California have to deal with. And I'm fortunate about that. I kind of live within my own bubble within this state. So, um, yeah, that's my take. I don't really worry about security here. And if I did worry about security where I live, which is one of the most affluent parts of the United States, I'm getting on the flight to Zurich because that means nowhere in America is safe. Um, let's see. Um, the other questions. So if the 10% own the bottom 90% of all outstanding shares, how would redistributing a quarter of that to the bottom 50% be bad? Well, I mean, it would cause a lot of negative incentives. Like, why would people bother to grow or develop their companies if they know they're just going to have it all redistributed away anyway? And what makes you think that the bottom 50% are just as good stewards of capital as the top 10%? As we've seen with several countries that have went through communism and then reset, the same old money families often climb back to the top, even with all their previously structured advantages and capital taken away from them. So, like, I think a lot of that is just mainly emotionally satisfying and politically weaponizing envy more than doing any actual economic good. Um, what's it called? That's an interesting comment, JD79. Why do you think that Zurich is not safe for people who live there? Um, do you agree that Elon is downwardly mobile? What do you mean by Elon being downwardly mobile? Like, he's one of the richest men in the world. He doesn't really have much room to go other than down on economic side of things. Question is, um, how is China able to build their middle class substantially while their stock market has barely moved? Well, a reason why China's stock market hasn't done well is because international investors don't trust it. And you need to have international capital in your market. Like, America draws a lot of international capital. Like, the US is only at 25% of GDP, yet it's over 67% of the market cap, which means you have a lot of international capital coming in to buy up US stocks. Whereas you don't really see a lot of international people investing in China because they're afraid that one day, if there's a bad phone call between Trump and Xi, that the U.S. will basically do to the Chinese stock market like what they did to the Russian stock market after the invasion of Ukraine, and that risk is keeping a lot of people out. But even before that, the Chinese investor just hasn't prioritized stocks. They tend to prefer putting their excess capital into real estate. Or so look at the Chinese housing market. It's the highest in the world relative to wages. So that's where a lot of the wealth in China has been allocated to. So that answers your question. Um, yeah. You can buy a lot of them through the Hong Kong exchange and the Hong Kong Shanghai Connect. Um, and the thing is, in some of these big cities like Shanghai, like, they have the same housing costs similar to here in Southern California, but their wages are maybe a fourth of those here in Southern California. So that's kind of just like an example of how the gap is really in terms of how extreme the housing market is relative to incomes there. Um, let's see. What are your thoughts on bonds such as a Boglehead portfolio? I think bonds that interest rates are real, positive, real, there are a lot of opportunities in bonds. And if you want to learn more about those specifically, feel free to schedule like a consultation with me about how I invest in the bond market specifically through my firm. But I don't really think bond indexes are a good idea because the way they're constructed isn't a virtuous cycle like the way that the S&P 500 is constructed. I think the best way to invest in bonds is either through issues directly or through good active managers. So that's kind of my take on bonds. Let's see. So there are neighborhoods in Zurich and Berlin where the chances of getting something done to you is 99%. Really, I understand that being Berlin or in like Brussels, but Zurich too. That's news to me. From your experience, do these finance fat cats care about working class people or not really? Like, would these people be fine with a company doing layoffs if it meant the stock price is going up? Well, I mean, most people would be fine with firing people if it meant the stock price goes up. That doesn't necessarily mean that people don't care about others. There's a lot of finance people who do charity privately and anonymously to help their communities. So I don't think necessarily like it's not a company's job to maximize income for its working class employees. Like the job of a company is to maximize returns for its shareholders. So that wealth can be reallocated and reused for other purposes. That's what having a dynamic capitalist economy is about. But yeah, I mean, do finance people generally care about the working class people? In general, it depends on what you mean by that. I don't really think that most finance people are not Marxist crusaders for redistribution of wealth. They're not like Gary's economics calling for wealth taxes. So if that's the answer of caring, then it's definitely no. But yeah, there are finance people who do care about the plights of their own communities and will try to help people out on their local level. So, thoughts on Scott Bessent? I think he's doing a great job. I think he's the one guy in this cabinet who actually kind of gets it from a market's perspective and is the voice of reason for the Trump administration when it comes to economic policy. Any thoughts on prediction markets and the way future generations consume their news going forward? I think people use prediction markets to help kind of like what I said, the stock price as a measurement of whether news matters or not. I think prediction markets can be the same thing. But I think the prediction markets tend to overreact a lot one way or the other as well. They're not perfect. So that's kind of my take on that. Let's see. New questions. Do you agree shaving your head is a pro growl or pro drift style? No, not necessarily. I think that different people would look better shaved head or not. So, like, if you can pull it off, it can be fine. But I think it takes a certain physique to not make you look really ugly with a shaved head, is my honest opinion. Like, people who don't have it, it makes it's not a good look. Any thoughts on UFOs? I think that UFOs are probably actually like secret U.S. military or foreign military test objects. I don't like aliens as UFOs. I think that aliens probably do exist just because of the Drake equation, but I don't think they've made it here yet. If they have, it would have been discovered by now. I don't think you could hide a secret that big. So my answer is, yeah, that's my answer on UFOs. Let me check if I hadn't missed any comments about what about Australia? Okay. What's the context of that question? So he asked me about what about Australia? Um, let's see. Do you have friends or associated in the lower class? Do you think upper class tries to avoid the lower class? I don't think anybody's deliberately trying to avoid people of other classes. Like the best opportunity usually to meet people of different social classes is your time in college. Universities are very good at bringing together people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, particularly state universities. Um, I think that people naturally gravitate towards their social class because of aligned values and relatability. Like I would consider myself in my hierarchy in the independent professional class, which is mostly small business owners and self-employed people who have enough clients that not a single client makes or breaks their business. But at the same time, they're not wealthy enough that they can just fully hire everybody to do their job and live a life of luxury. That's the successful business owner class. And ever since I left corporate America and went into entrepreneurship, my social circle drastically changed from other like institutional professional class and more middle class people who are 9 to 5 employees who grew up in a similar socioeconomic background to me and similar level education and all that, shifted away to people with different educational backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds, different like cultural backgrounds to a certain degree, but we all kind of had the similar thing in common of being within the independent professional class. Like I would say well over half of my friends today are self-employed in some sort. And it's just easy for me to relate to people. They kind of go through the same battles that I do. They can relate to a lot of the life that I have. They have the free time in the same times of the day that I do, that a lot of people who work more conventional jobs do not. And they don't have, and I can't, and they can go on vacations with me to places like that other people have to worry about things like PTO and stuff like that. And so that has been a big shift. Like my social circle got a lot more diverse in the superficial ways, but it got a lot less diverse in terms of like my true class background, which is what kind of helped me and learn about this situation about, and generally your friends are within one plus or minus one level of the American class structure you are. And it's mainly just because of relatability. There's no ulterior motive there. So, yeah. Um, do you think writing options is advantageous? I'm not going to go into specific advice about writing options on this live stream. Thoughts on God Sod? I know who he is. I don't know much about him otherwise. Thoughts on Albertan independence from Canada? If I was an Albertan, I'd be in favor of joining the United States, but I am biased because I am an American. I think that their economy and their culture is more aligned with what the US wants. And I think that Canada has disproportionately used them as a revenue source to finance weaker provinces such as Quebec and Ontario, and the Maritimes all come at the expense of the surplus from Alberta, which isn't particularly fair. And I think that, yeah, I would support it if I was a Canadian. And if I was an American, I would support Alberta. Would I support all of Canada? No, because I think it would. I think a lot of Canada doesn't want to be part of the United States, for one. And two, I think that a lot of the Canadian ethos and nationalism is built on being naturally in opposition to American ideology, to the progressive side, which I think would, it's like adding a whole California to America in terms of its politics if you add all of Canada. Like I think the way that it would be done, if they would try to do it, is that Alberta, Saskatchewan, and BC would be added along with the territories directly to the north of those. BC would be the blue state, and a combined Alberta and Saskatchewan would be the red state, so that we have there's no partisan bias on the additions to the Senate. Like, and the remaining Canada would be Manitoba and Ontario and the Maritimes and northern Quebec to create a land bridge, and then Quebec would be an independent country. So if there was a breakup with Canada, that's how I think it would shake out. How likely do I think that is? I have no idea, but it's well under 50%. Yeah, that's my thoughts on that. Thoughts on Peter Thiel? I think Peter Thiel is one of the more interesting minds in economics and finance and business. Should have put Peter Thiel in earlier in terms of sources that I follow. Yeah, I generally think that I have a positive view on Peter Thiel for a variety of reasons. Do you think the market movements can be um, predicted by using mathematics? If it was, there'd be several quant funds that would have figured it out by now. So I think in the short term, you could find mathematical anomalies that work, but they eventually get arbed away. Um, yeah. What is your tips on memorizing info and applying it? I read a lot for school, but half the time I can't remember. There's a few ways. One is you do it slowly. Like if you like what I did is I would do all of my reading over a gradual period of time. And so then it just gets absorbed. Like instead of doing a cram study session of 12 hours in one day, do 4 days of 3 hours. Second, teaching it to somebody else helps you learn it. Because if you need to be able to teach something to somebody else, you have to have enough basic understanding of it to properly explain it. So if you have a friend who wants to learn about the topic, then what's it called? Then that's kind of an idea. All right, question. Would you offer a service for companionship? What do you mean, like a matchmaking service? Like like finding your soulmate through Nick? Can you please clarify on that question? Because I don't get what you're asking. What do you think of Forex traders? I think the ones who are leveraging 50 to 1 are just gamblers, and that's why FX concepts blew up. I think there is money to be made on trading Forex, but it requires usually some leverage, and it's mostly technical analysis, like in the short term. Long term, you can make big bets on currencies, and they usually take a while to play out, and you can usually get more return through a currency trade by investing in that local country's equity market or bond market. So, yeah, um, that's kind of my takes on it. Um, on in terms of the FX markets. Um, yeah, let's see. Are you interested in quantum physics or any other out there subjects? I mean, I've read about other subjects. I've tried I get the most out there stuff I like. I mean, the favorite topics I like to read about other than finance are geography, history are definitely 1 and 2, entrepreneurship, psychology, and stuff like that. Can my friendship be paid for? Um, that's a weird question to be asked, honestly. I've never thought about selling my friendship, to be quite honest with you. I mean, I would say that a lot of my clients for Spearhead have become friends. So the closest thing you could do is become a client of my wealth management firm, and a friendship may naturally develop that way. Um, and then I have the meetups, but that's not really paying to be my friend. That's just socializing. But no, that sounds like something like selling my time. Yeah, I do have consulting. So, I mean, I do schedule like calls with people. You can find it on my Calendly page. I generally take free consultations with people who have specific wealth management questions. But if you want to ask about anything else, you can schedule a call on my Calendly, a 30-minute or a 60-minute call. So I do offer that for people who have questions, because I used to get flooded with consultations for people ask me for help for all things across the board. And as my life has gotten busier, both in my personal life and my professional life, I just don't have the bandwidth for it anymore. So hopefully that answers your question. Um, what's it called? Can people with a regular job become rich through investments? I mean, if their savings rate is high enough, they can. And if they are shrewd investors. But yeah, like it's going to take a very high paying job to get to the level where it's considered rich from my definition. Um, for your consultations, it matters your income is. Well, if you don't have, like for the investment side, if you don't have any capital to invest and you're not saving regularly, it's very hard for me to help you. So you need to kind of get your groundwork set up to a certain degree first, is what I would say. Um, yeah. The amount I'd sell for a one-time payment would be about $10 billion. I think I mentioned that in the last live stream. Any trips how to break into VC without a traditional finance background? Well, yeah. Be a successful entrepreneur in tech and sell your company. And then you'd be like, you're one of these guys who was able to build it and be a successful ex-founder. VCs would be killing to have you. That's the easiest way. Yeah. What do you consider rich? I did a video about this. How much wealth does it take to be considered rich? I generally think it's 20 to 25 million plus a paid off house in a place you want to live is the number. So yeah, it could be less in lower cost of living places. It could be higher in Switzerland, but in general, that's kind of the level that I'd say 20 to 25 million plus a house. Yeah. And then let's see. Where do you look for macro intelligence? I mean, I read a lot of research. I talked about that earlier in the live stream. I have friends of mine in the industry that I chat with, or people who I know personally who are experts in certain things like geopolitics and things that I find helpful for that. But I'm always trying to learn. And the internet, there's a lot of sources too. Thoughts on freelancing bookkeeping? I'm not an expert in that. It seems like it's something at risk of being offshored or automated, but take my opinion with a heavy grain of salt on bookkeeping. I don't know enough to really have a strong opinion on it. Let's see. Let's see other questions that I've got. I think I'm going to do this chat for another 20 to 30 minutes. So if you want me to get to your question, ask it now, because by the time it happens later in the call, I may be ready to make dinner and leave. How much savings do you recommend someone to have before marrying? Can we marry broke and build from there? I don't think there's a savings number about before getting married. I think what's more important for getting married is what your values are lined up. Like, is this somebody who has the same approach to you for faith, for family, for finances? Like, if you're both young and both don't have money, then you guys can build together. Like, I don't think there's a minimum amount of savings. You just don't want to go into debt to pay for your wedding. So if you want to get married and don't have a lot of money, just do a simpler wedding. But in general, I don't think there's a minimum savings. It's about more romantic compatibility. And is this person willing to be a teammate for you and work together for your long-term combined goals? When am I coming to Atlanta? Well, I mean, I don't know yet. It will be in 2026 because I am retired. The tour is wrapping up this year. But if you want to come to Atlanta, vote on the survey, which I just put in the chat again, on where you want me to go next year. I'm going to go all over the world. We're going to start with Beverly Hills and Australia, Sydney and Gold Coast, and then go out from there. Have you seen the movie On Golden Pond? No, I have not. What's it called? Yeah. That's as someone in their 20s, should you focus on corporate career growth or entrepreneurship? Well, you could kind of depend. Is your long-term goal to be an entrepreneur, or is it just to maximize wealth or get a comfortable upper middle class life? Because they're very different answers to that. I think that when it comes to, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you need to spend 3 to 5 years in corporate America in the field that you want to start a business in. So you can learn how the industry works from the inside out and figure out where the needs are and the holes of things that solutions that you can provide as an entrepreneur to your peers in the industry. It's a lot easier to start a business in an industry that you have a base knowledge of and experience working in than going completely from left field. So either way, you should spend your early 20s in corporate America. Maybe 26 plus, that's when you start considering entrepreneurship. If you feel like you've built enough experience and connections and figured out the right idea, but you have your whole life ahead of you. Be patient and wait for the right opportunity. Like the average start founder is not until his late 30s, early 40s. So this idea that every entrepreneur is in their 20s is not true. The only thing I would put hold on is do not have children before starting a business, because you have a much higher fixed cost level that makes it harder to stay in the game. Um, Thoughts on newlyweds living in Toronto versus Halifax and Calgary? Well, if you're not worried about job opportunities, why would you live in the most expensive city unless if you think the quality of life in Toronto is that much better? Like, if you are working from home, um, I mean, a day trader, I'm not sure how sustainable this. You might have to have another job. I would just move to whatever place you think is the most enjoyable to live. Like, I don't like snow, but if I did, Calgary would be nice because then you're very close to Banff. But um, yeah, it just depends on your personal preferences at that point. Do you edit all of your on YouTube? I do with the help of an AI software. Uh, that's that's how I edit. Like I did hire an editor briefly last year, but I didn't really like how the videos turned out, so I went back to doing it on my own. The best thing. All right, so let's see. Who is the real goat in markets, Buffett or Jim Simons? Um, they're very different. Simons is quant, Buffett is more value investing. I mean, I'd say it's either Buffett or Stan Druckenmiller or actually Charlie Munger. I think Charlie Munger is highly underrated, and I'd put him as like the goat in markets and Druckenmiller. Those are the two I would say. Um, yeah, and then what's it called? That's the answer to that question. What marketing strategies have you seen work to market luxury consumer products? I think just I don't really know. I'm not an expert in marketing luxury consumer products, and I would say that what works is that's a good question. I'm just guessing, so don't take my answer seriously here. Um, is First targeting like old and new money enclaves. Um, like like a lot of these newer luxury brands, they focus on local boutique stores in places like Gstaad or Newport Beach or Beverly Hills or um, Palm Beach, Florida. So I would first try to get a cult or niche following in one of these cities, and then hopefully word of mouth can carry you from there. But it's not my niche. That's just me guessing. Um, yeah. How do you think Buffett can predict market moves? I don't think he predicts market moves. He just knows when valuations are favorable and uses that to help him define his risk. Like anybody who claims to be able to predict market moves is not being entirely honest. Uh, but yeah, who are your favorite finance YouTubers? Well, other than me, I would say it's Patrick Boyle. I would say is my top other finance YouTuber. I think some of the other ones I mentioned earlier in this channel are pretty good too. I mean, on this live stream. Do you think the big political divide in the USA, France, et cetera, is going to have an impact on the market? What do you mean? Just like political instability generally? Yeah, if it results in an increased probability of sovereign default, it will impact the market. I think it's more likely to impact the market in France than the United States. I think the US is actually healing from its political divisions right now more than them getting worse. Like a lot of this stuff, you don't notice it until 10 or 15 years later. Like I used to tell everybody that religion in the United States bottomed out in 2008, and that's when atheism was at its peak, and the data was kind of lagged on that. So um, I think that you just didn't really see to notice the uptick in religion until 10, 15 years later. And I think it'll be the same with politics. Like, I think that peak polarization was probably in the early 2020s, like either 2000, probably 2021 ish. And we'll start to see it slowly normalize, especially if economic conditions get better for millennial and Gen Z. Favorite Pokemon, like Pokemon game or Pokemon, the actual Pokemon. Like the best Pokemon game in terms of quality has to be Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Those are they add a lot of the modern gen mechanics, but they have like the old school Pokemon, and like they have Johto and Kanto in that one. I think those are good. Legends Arceus, a newer one I like a lot, and then of course like Red and Yellow version, and also Ruby and Sapphire, and Fire Red and Leaf Green. I'm kind of biased towards Gen 1 and Gen 3, and then Heart Gold, Soul Silver. The monsters themselves, oh, there's a lot. I mean, I tend to like the dragon types. That's probably pretty basic, though. Like some of my favorite Pokemon probably are like Charizard, Gyarados, um, Rhydon, Nidoking, um, what's it called? Of the old Gen 1. Yeah. Like, and then I could go, I like also Swampert and the Mudkip line in Gen 3. Yeah, those are good. And Rayquaza and Groudon. Actually, Groudon's my favorite legendary Pokemon. So yeah. Let's see. Is it wise to have multiple wealth managers or let the bulk of your money stay with one due to compounding nature money of growth? It depends. If the wealth managers do two different types of strategies, it might make sense to have more than one. If you particularly trust, it's all about trust with wealth managers. If you particularly trust like a wealth management firm or a team or an individual, and you want them to manage your money, then go ahead. But you can also diversify as well. I can make arguments for either side, to be quite honest, but I wouldn't really have multiple wealth managers for the sake of having multiple wealth managers. You got to have a good reason why, is my take on it. But yeah, I have several clients who use myself and another wealth manager, so it's not an abnormal thing. Have you ever heard of infinite banking or whole life insurance with high cash value? Yeah, I have heard about it, and I'm not really an expert on insurance, so I try to refrain from talking about it too much. But yeah, I know it's a thing. I have mixed opinions about it, but yeah, that's kind of, sorry for not having a better answer, but I don't want to sound uninformed on this live stream. If Dubai offered you a full citizenship plus 10 billion, but you got to denounce your US and never visit again, will you take it? You can take your family and friends with you. That's a tough one. I've never been to Dubai, so I don't know if I would want to live there. And would I have to stay in the UAE my whole life? If that's the case, the answer is probably no. If I could go to every other country than the US, it's a different story. Yeah. So like that, and I mean, you know what? Maybe I'll do a meetup in Dubai if enough of people in the Emirates want to see me there. It is one of the choices that you can vote on the form. No, can go anywhere in the U.S. Well, that changes it. I'd probably just move to Switzerland and live there. If I had if that like, but that yeah, that's probably like so. It's I really love America though, so that makes it a tough choice. But for 10 billion, and I can move all my friends and family with me without, if I can move all my friends and family with me to Switzerland and 10 billion, I think I'd probably take it to a certain degree. But I do love America, and so it'd be hard for me to take it. Um, but do you have an Instagram we can follow? I mean, I do have an Instagram, but I don't really publish much on it, so I don't really think I feel like sharing it at the moment. Did you ever play Magic the Gathering? No, I never did. I never got into Magic. The only like trading card game I ever really got into was Pokemon cards, mainly from fourth through sixth grade. Um, yeah, let's see. Do any of my clients use infinite banking or self banking instruments? I don't really talk to them about it, so I don't know, to be quite honest. Um, if you could live anywhere, cost no issue, where would you go? I would stay where I'm at right now. I love living in Orange County. So yeah, I think I'd travel a little bit more and rotate. Like if money wasn't an object, I would live here still most of the year. I would probably have a summer home in Lugano, Switzerland, that I would spend a large chunk of the summer, and then I'd have a third home in Hawaii where I would take like a 1 week vacation every quarter to go to, and that would kind of be my rotation. Maybe add a fourth one in Punta del Este, but I think the Hawaii, Orange County, and Lugano rotation is what I would do if money wasn't an option. But I'd spend the bulk of my time here. I like where I live. I'm very fortunate. Thoughts on military schools like West Point and Navy and Air Force? They're great schools. They training our future leaders and serve of our armed services. They're up there in terms of prestige along with the Ivy Leagues. Yeah, I don't really have anything negative to say about them. They're very important institutions in our country. Will the U.S. be moving to central bank digital currency? Um, no, I mean, unless if you count just digital payment system as digital currency. Thank you for all the support, creative visualizations, and have a great rest of your day. Thoughts on Pierre Poilievre's approach to handling Canada and his dealing with America? Well, I mean, I don't think he handled it that well in the election, which is part of why he lost to Carney. But I don't know how it's changed since then. Do you like Volvo as a brand? It has a reputation for being safety, but also kind of boring. Um, I mean, I thought about buying a Volvo because I've heard they're going to be possibly the first car to go full level 5 driverless. And whoever's the first car company to do that so that I can just record videos during my commute instead of driving, then you know what? Or just read research or relax and not have to actually be behind the wheel. I'll buy whatever car is the first one to safely do that. But all things equal, I prefer other European car brands to Volvo. Um, what's it called? Why Punta del Este over Montevideo? I mean, Montevideo is just a big city. It's a nice city, but it's a big city. It's like any other world capital. Punta del Este is a nice beach community. It's like a mix of Corona del Mar, California, like Miami Beach and Monaco all in one place. And it's very clean. It's very safe. It's got a lot of the good meat that you can find like Argentina. And it's good for water's nice for swimming and surfing. They have a few good golf courses around there. I really loved it. It's one of my favorite vacation spots in the world. Um, I don't really want to live in some bustling city if I didn't have to. I prefer the resort towns. Um, what's it called? Yeah. Let's see. What's other question that I had? Could you give us an insight how you manage your own wealth and your plans? Well, I mean, I don't really go into my specific wealth management stuff because that's what I just do what I do for my clients at my firm. So, yeah. Will you attend any of the events at the next Olympics? Yeah, I will try to attend as many events as I possibly can for LA 2028 because this is the one time in my life where the Olympics will be close enough to my hometown that I don't have to stay at a hotel or fly out there or anything like that. And I'm fortunate that LA is such a great place to host an Olympics that it's coming to where I'm going to be. So I'm going to probably cancel all my traveling and vacations that year and use all my travel budget for the Olympics because that is a once in a lifetime opportunity that is more valuable than me going to Europe that year. And so, yeah, I'm really big on the Olympics. World Cup, I'm not as fan of soccer. The ticket prices are quite high for a sport that I marginally care about. If it was US Switzerland in the World Cup final, I think I'd find a way to get there. Or if they played like quarterfinals or later, maybe because those are my two favorite countries for soccer. But especially if it's a world US, I'm rooting for a US Switzerland final for the World Cup. But it's very unlikely to happen because neither of those teams I think are in the top 10 of the FIFA rankings. But yeah, one can dream, I guess. What's your strategy with YouTube? Have you found that it's a good source of ideas? Like, I mean, for like investment ideas? I mean, I think the comments actually give me a lot of good ideas for future videos to make and to do just deeper dive personal research on some of these topics. My strategy for YouTube is just to kind of keep growing the channel by continuing to make interesting, thought-provoking content. I'll probably do one of these lives about once a month or approximately. I probably not going to make very many shorts because my content's not well suited for shorts. And yeah, I eventually might want to do more collaborations with similar YouTubers within the niche or other interesting people. But it's still mostly going to be my own content, my own ideas. And I'm just going to keep kind of doing the similar strategy I've been doing the last few months. I mean, mix of social class stuff and some other things. Like I'm going to revive the economic futures series, starting with Switzerland coming out next weekend. I also have videos coming about the economic futures of Italy and the Netherlands. And I might do ones about local states as well. I have a lot of ideas for videos. I already have video ideas for the next like 30 videos I'm going to do or more. So I have a good backlog, so you guys will be sufficiently entertained. If one of your videos said you're fourth generation derived from small business owners, what type of small business does your family own? My dad owns a manufacturer's representative company. My grandfather was a doctor, and my great grandfather was owned a canned food factory. So it's all kinds of different industries. But yeah, and then a lot of my uncles and my brother are also small business owners, so it runs in the family. Um, let's see. What's your favorite thing to do in Switzerland? Oh, there's a lot of things I like to do in Switzerland. I like hiking. I like taking the gondola up to the top of mountains and then hiking down. Um, I like going to the hot springs, and I like the water park Alpamare in Pfeffikon. I like going on walks around the lake Zurich and Rapperswil. I like having the meetups. Those are fun. I like seeing my relatives because I have a lot of relatives who live in Switzerland. I just like exploring and walking around random, interesting towns and in Switzerland and doing anything that I could do here in the United States. Yeah, it's just a high quality of life place in general. And I like riding the trains. I wouldn't really ride trains that much in the States, but Switzerland, they're very efficient and they're very fast and they're comfortable. And yeah, it's always on time. Do you respect Rick Steves' books and business? I think he has some interesting things, but I think a lot of his advice is a little bit superficial and caters more to this progressive left idea of like, I don't know, every place is equally valid. There aren't places that are better or worse to visit than others. I don't know. I think that like my dad is a big fan of his. A lot of boomers are too, but I think he's okay. I think he's gotten too political recently, which leaves an opportunity, which I mentioned in one of my posts for a niche for a right-wing Rick Steves to come out there, because I think that too many conservative-leaning people bash travel and don't see the value of exploring the rest of the world. Like, I think that world travel doesn't necessarily only a left-leaning, like liberal coded thing to do. There's people who are on the right side of the aisle can benefit a lot from travel, and they can learn about why America works. If you like your country, you can learn about what our country does better than other countries or what we can learn from other countries. Not every country is inherently running themselves in a worse way, not even Europe. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for that niche to be filled by somebody, particularly targeting like the upper middle class traveler who's spending, say, like, I don't know, $200 to $400 a night on hotels and maybe taking their family with them, or if they're empty nesters or don't have kids yet, going on their own. And young men too, who want to travel. Because a lot of travel advice caters more, I think, towards either like backpacker crowd or younger women. So I think there's a lot of niches in that opportunity in that niche, but I just don't. If I had time for a second channel, I consider exploring it, but I'm very strapped for time as it is right now. I don't know what Mentis Wave is. And I'm not really enough. I don't know enough about psychology to talk about emotionally manipulative mothers. If an adult has either 2 years to learn, read books in finance, or learn a new language, what would you advise them to choose? I would choose finance and investing. I think with the era of like smart translators, foreign language fluency is becoming less important over time. Whereas I think even with the developments of AI, the market intuition you gain from developing a knowledge of finance and investing, and not just you can use it for career purposes, you can use it to manage your personal finances, you can use it for entrepreneurship purposes. I think finance is a far more useful skill than languages, but also I'm heavily biased. Have you ever vacationed in the Northeast, particularly upstate New York, Finger Lakes, Adirondacks? I mean, I did live in the Northeast for a brief period of time in my 20s, and I did explore a lot of places, but I focused more on cities. So I went to Boston, Montreal, Toronto with a detour to the Niagara Falls, DC, Harpers Ferry National Park in West Virginia, Maine, but only like southern Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Greenwich, Connecticut, Newport, Rhode Island. That's kind of the extent, and Philadelphia, and Atlantic City / like the Jersey Shore, like a little bit, but that's kind of the extent of what I've seen in the Northeast. I haven't really gone to much of the rural areas in the Northeast. If I wanted to, it'd be to go to Maine, further north, like maybe Bar Harbor or Acadia National Park is probably the place that I'd want to go if I was going to do a more nature-focused visit to the Northeast. But yeah, usually I spend most of my time when I go there in cities. Do you think there's a mortgage bubble? Not really, but let's see. What other questions I've got here before I wrap things up. I'm starting to lose my voice. A lot of these questions I know are kind of in jest, so I'm not going to really answer them. I'm starting to get better at that. Other thoughts on taxation regulations? I mean, you need just enough regulations to make sure that all the participants in a given market or industry are acting in good faith, but not excessive regulations that prevent competition. So I'm generally probably in favor of less regulations than the current system has rather than more. But the regulations that are put in place need to be used to curtail moral hazard and make sure people act in good faith and maintain rule of law. Taxation, I generally think that I'm in favor of lower taxation, but if you're going to have the government the size it is, it needs to be paid for. I'm not really in favor of lowering taxes that cause deficits. I think that the income tax is the worst way to do taxes, and I would replace it with other forms of taxation as well. But I've done whole videos about that, so watch my videos on alternative forms of taxation if you want to know more about that. Best way to protect yourself from a debt crisis depends what country you live in. Put your money in a country that's not going through the debt crisis. That's my answer to that question. Yeah. Let's see. Why don't guys like Dana White and Grant Cardone ever look sophisticated, old money, no matter how much money they amass? Well, I mean, I don't really know the reasons for their fashion choices. Like maybe they grew up in a lot of people keep the fashion styles of the class they grew up in. So I really don't know a good answer for that. But yeah, I think at this point I'm going to wrap up this live stream. I'm starting to get tired and hungry. But thank you guys all for. I'm definitely more of a still water person when it comes to the water I drink, and I like it cold. But thank you guys all for watching, and yeah, there we got a lot of good new content coming. And if you want to vote on where I'm going to do the tour next year, fill out this form here. If you want to have a consultation to learn more about what we do for people on the wealth management side, fill out this form here. And if you want to see us in our last meetup in San Diego on October 4th, I'm going to put a link in the chat for that too. And yeah, thank you guys all for watching. I think this might be my most watched live stream yet. So I appreciate all the support. And I'll probably do another one of these after I wrap up the tour in October. Have a good night.